everyone. Thank you for joining us today. This is On Air with LHAG. I am here today with Encik Megat Hizaini, who heads our Islamic Finance Practice Group of the firm. Encik Megat, thank you for joining us today.
Okay, good to see you.
Good to see you too. To start off, one of the main misconceptions of Islamic banking and finance is that it is merely a cosmetically enhanced version of conventional banking. What do you think about that?
There is that misconception, but I think the reason why there is that misconception is because from the customer's perspective, they go to a bank, the bank offers both conventional and Islamic banking product. It's the same bank location, same bank staff. It's the bank staff that will offer the customer Islamic and conventional products. So from the customer's perspective, it's the same thing. So maybe because of that, there is that misconception.
Right.
Maybe if the bank is a standalone Islamic bank, maybe things will be different. Or maybe if it is a non-bank that offers Islamic financial products, then maybe things will be different.
Sure. Can you then walk us through what are the main features or the main principles of Islamic banking and financing?
I think the main feature would be the fact that it doesn't involve any loan specifically. It just involves some trading activity. So it's either buying and selling or renting or investing, where as a result of these type of trade transactions, there's a profit generated to the seller. So the bank comes in and basically becomes a seller of something, and therefore will make profit from that transaction.
Right. One of the features of Islamic banking and finance is sukuks instead of the conventional bonds. Can you tell us a bit more about what are the advantages of sukuks, and can a non-Islamic or a company that does not necessarily is Shariah compliant, can they then opt to issue sukuks instead of conventional bonds?
Well, sukuk is similar in terms of function as the conventional bond, in that an investor buys a paper, puts in money to subscribe to the paper, gets returns or fixed return over a period of time, or rather anticipated returns over a period of time. So in that sense, in terms of the payment obligations, it's similar, but the underlying structure is different. For bonds, it's a loan, a straightforward loan, but for a sukuk, there is again a trade transaction, whether it's a sale such as Murabahah or Tawarruq, or buy Bithaman Ajil, or a lease, Ijara, or investment structure such as Wakala, or maybe Mudarabah, Musyarakah.
Right.
There is some trade that happens at the underlying structure basis.
Okay.
So because of that, of the underlying structure is different.
Sure. Do you then see now a rise in popularity for non-Islamic companies in issuing sukuks instead of conventional bonds?
In Malaysia, that has been the more popular route, to take up sukuk instead of conventional bond. And you find that the issuers are not just companies that are so-called Islamic per se, but other companies that just need funding for whatever purpose. So long as that purpose is permissible from an Islamic law perspective, then and the source of payment is also permissible, then that shouldn't be an issue.
Why do you think sukuk is gaining such massive popularity among entities or within the corporate framework in Malaysia?
A few reasons. I think number one is in Malaysia is you have a very active sukuk market.
Sure.
In fact, in Malaysia is the biggest sukuk market in the world in terms of tradability, in terms of size. Malaysia leads the way. Also in terms of trading.
More so than the Middle East.
Middle East, what happens is that there are a number of issuers. They issue big size papers, but there's very little trading that happens.
I see.
Papers are issued, the investors hold to maturity. So you don't trade. In Malaysia, there's issuance, there's subscription, there's also trading of the papers in the secondary market. And Malaysia, I think, is very active in all these aspects of sukuk or capital market activity. Right.
Speaking of, companies that participate in any form of Islamic financing or banking, I understand that, for example, financial institutions, when it comes to issuing Islamic banking products, they will be overseen by a Shariah Advisory Board. Can you tell us a bit more about what obligations would that board entail?
Well, the Shariah Board of an Islamic bank provides oversight on Islamic law matters.
Right.
And they normally come in where there's something new, whether it's a new product, new documentation, new issues relating to an existing product. They'll come in and essentially provide comfort and guidance on whether that something new is permissible or not from an Islamic law perspective. And in Malaysia, you have Sharia boards for the banks, but over and above that, you also have Sharia boards of the regulators.
Okay.
So Bank Negara Central Bank, they also have a Sharia board. Securities Commission, they also have a Sharia board, but their board is called something else. It's called the Shariah Advisory Council.
Right.
And the role of the Sharia board of that regulator is more to determine issues of policy, to ensure consistency in standards.
Okay.
You don't want to have a situation whereby there are disputes resulting in credibility of the product being challenged. So you have the Sharia board of the regulator essentially providing standards to be adopted for the industry.
Okay. So would you find a Sharia advisory board in your typical, let's say for example, a Shariah-compliant Sendirian Berhad? Would they be required to sort of have a fixture of a Sharia advisory board within their governance?
You're talking about a company that does
Yes,
business?
that participates in Islamic finance and banking transactions.
They don't have to.
Okay.
But if, say, a company wants to raise funds via Sukuk, then they will need to appoint a Sharia advisor for that issuance. So the
Okay.
focus of the Sharia advisor is just to look into the matters involving the paper, the issuance, the structure, documentation, whether it is Sharia compliant. But there's no Sharia advisor for the company per se. It's
Right.
just that in relation to the paper issue, you have someone providing oversight on Sharia matters.
So it's more so of consultancy services.
I suppose when it comes to that paper, yes. It would be.
Right. Speaking of the Sharia Advisory Council you were mentioning of BNM, I understand that they recently issued guidelines or regulations on restructuring of financing in light of the COVID-19 pandemic. Can you tell us a bit more about that?
COVID-19 affects everyone. It affects customers, not just conventional banking customers, but also Islamic banking customers. And the typical structure that you have for restructuring for customers who face financial hardship will be for banks to provide some form of restructuring or rescheduling arrangements. But if you look at it from an Islamic law perspective, if a customer or if a debtor faces financial hardship, then time should be given for the debtor to pay. And again, from purely Islamic perspective, Islamic law perspective, when you give them time, you should also not burden them with additional payment. So from the conceptual perspective, if a debtor faces financial hardship, you should give them time and not burden them further. Having said that, and looking at what is done commercially, where Islamic financial products are offered by financial institutions, the way in which financial institutions would restructure financing would be to add the profit element.
Right.
So when it comes to this situation where there's restructuring, a profit element being involved, the Sharia Advisory Council of Bank Negara has laid down certain parameters for how it should be done. For example, there should be proper terms to be communicated to customers. Customers must agree to those terms, and if the additional payment requires additional profit to be generated, then there might be a new trade transaction that needs to be entered into between the bank and the customer, and that also needs to be agreed between the bank and the customer. So I think looking at what the Sharia Advisory Council had determined, I think the way that they have gone about it is to say that yes, you can have this restructuring, you can have a profit element, but it must be done within the rules and within parameters that are acceptable from an Islamic law perspective.
Right. As a last question, just to close off our discussion in Cik Megat, would you be comfortable or would you be in a position to sort of say that Islamic financing and Islamic banking is very lenient or more in favor of the customer rather than the financial institutions, for example, rather than much more so than conventional banks?
I would say that Islamic banking is meant to put the status between customer and the bank on equal footing.
Right.
You're entering into trade transactions, so there should be parity in terms of bargaining power between the seller and the buyer. Similarly, when it comes to Islamic financial product, have a trade transaction. Bank may be the buyer, bank may be the seller, customer will be the buyer. So the terms of the trade must be fair to both. So if you look at it from that perspective, Islamic banking is meant to be fairer and more equitable compared to the conventional banking, lender and borrower relationship.
Right. So now, Encik Megat, it's on to the fun part of the show.
Okay.
We will be doing something called the rapid fire session, where we want you to answer as many questions as you can within 30 seconds.
I'll try.
So the record to beat was Mr. Lambert's, which was 9 questions in 30 seconds.
Okay, I'll try.
So are you ready?
Sure, why not?
Okay. Name a word that starts with the letter Q.
Queen.
Apart from Malaysia, what is your favorite country?
Is Singapore.
One food that you wouldn't want to give up.
Nasi.
If you could teach one subject in school, what would it be?
Math.
Safari or Google?
Google.
Name of the primary school you went to.
St. John's.
One sport you played during school.
Tennis.
Federer, Djokovic or Nadal?
Djokovic.
P. Ramlee or Siti Nurhaliza?
P. Ramlee.
Going back in time or to the future?
Back in time.
Where was your first job?
University.
Okay, Encik Megat, we have run out of time and you managed to answer 11 questions. So
Okay.
well done. That
Okay.
is quite a feat, I must say.
Alright, okay. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Encik Megat, for sharing with us your wisdom and giving us a bit of an insight into Islamic banking and finance, which I have learned quite a bit personally. So thank you, Encik Megat.
Pleasure to be here. Thank you very much.
Thank you, everyone, for joining us today. This has been On Air with LHAG. We will see you again soon. Bye.
Bye.